They established a caliphate that ruled over millions of people. But their 5-year reign of terror was short-lived.
ISIS is a death cult. It's a death cult.
We are the victorious group.
And now the caliphate is destroyed. Their leader has sworn to fight on in a global jihad, promising to bring the fight to the West. So is the Islamic State really dead? Join me as I trace the rise and fall of I Came Back to witness the end. Only a few thousand of the most hardcore militants were left. They were surrounded in a little Syrian town called Baghouz.
This is as far as we can go. It's very dangerous.
Adnan Afrin is a field commander in a force made up predominantly of ethnic Kurds, a key ally in the fight to defeat ISIS. Afrin took me to the front lines.
They don't look like they're ready to surrender. He's saying the ones who are in here, they're prepared to die.
ISIS into this final holdout, a squalid section of Baghouz, no bigger than a few football fields.
There are battles raging inside. This is the last stage. Either they surrender or we'll kill them.
Little by little, ISIS lost its grip, and the Kurds closed in.
He's saying to stay in one line because there could be IEDs. They haven't cleared this area.
The operation to strangle Baghouz went on for weeks.
Turn up the light.
We watched as American bombs rained down night after night.
The last bastion of the Islamic State tonight is on fire.
And then, suddenly, the battle for Baghouz was over. Thousands of people emerged from Baghouz, stumbling amid the rubble. They were stunned, starved, and had nowhere to go. They were the wives and children of the ISIS fighters. They'd given up, and in return were given food and water, before being taken away to refugee camps. Eventually, the men surrendered too, hundreds of them. And even though we'd seen them fighting and many were battle-scarred, they all told us they were just cooks.
When they now came to me, some of them told me I was working with the Secret Service of them. So information comes in, and some of them, they are not true.
So he claimed, but the video evidence against him was damning.
We came here to take over this place, inshallah, and put the Sharia and implement the Sharia. After we go and we kill and we take the neck off of Assad, we will take the neck off of Trump.
You appeared in one of their propaganda videos.
Yeah.
So that sounds like someone who's quite a believer.
Yes, I was a believer.
And we will put the flag of Dawlatul Islamiyya, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the highest titles, inshallah.
Even in defeat, it was clear these were some of the most committed ISIS followers. This man told me with a smile, ISIS lives on in our hearts. The women I met were equally unrepentant. They didn't even attempt to hide their hostility and anger, hurling insults and water. It could have been worse. Several women blew themselves up rather than surrender. Whenever they saw our cameras, the women and some of the children would raise a single finger in the air, just like they were taught to do. It represents the one true God who could never be defeated.
Is it over? ISIS finished?
No. Next time it will be in your lands.
As they were hauled off to camps and prisons, I was left wondering, could that threat? The defeat of the ISIS state created a new problem. What to do with all the people? The millions who lived under ISIS were suddenly homeless. Thousands of the most radical were sent to refugee camps, including this sprawling sea of tents in northern Syria. The Al-Hol camp is home to 65,000 people. The families of ISIS fighters are kept here until their home countries figure out what to do with them. But their governments don't want them back. So they languish here, poorly guarded, with nothing to do.
And where are you from?
From Russia.
From Russia.
I came to the Al-Hol camp because I heard a young woman was here who said she was American, named Hoda.
Hoda, I'm Richard Engel from NBC.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk to you.
Hoda Muthanna was born in New Jersey, the daughter of a diplomat from Yemen.
I'm just as American as any blonde hair, blue-eyed girl, and I would like to stay in my country and do American things.
Instead, age 20, she left her comfortable, even privileged life in the US to come to Syria to join ISIS. She was an ardent believer and used her Twitter account to incite Americans to commit murder.
There's one tweet in particular where you talk about calling on Americans to do drive-by shootings, to rent a truck and drive over people, spilling their blood, and you say, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, go out and do it.
Again, my lawyer told me not to speak about these things.
Hoda now claims she is filled with remorse, but she was literally wedded to the cause, marrying 3 ISIS fighters, one after another.
So you were married 3 times?
Yeah,
here.
3 times.
And 2 were killed and 1
Divorced, yeah.
divorced. And how were these men killed?
On the battlefield.
They were fighters. They were killed fighting. Did you ever get any military training? I've seen those images of the ISIS women with guns.
No, we didn't. Women didn't really have a role there other than being a housewife.
That's just not true. ISIS had a women-only brigade of enforcers, part of the feared morality police. They were called the Hansa Brigade. Since ISIS had strict rules forbidding men and women from interacting with each other, it was these women who were responsible for policing and punishing other women. In a safe house in southern Turkey, I met 3 of them and asked a woman named Dua what her role was. We were a female police force, she said. We would tour the markets, take part in raids, and take women who were violating the dress code to our headquarters for punishment. Punishable offenses ranged from standing too close to a man to consuming alcohol, or even just having a hint of a pattern on their black abayas. This woman was wearing an abaya with a design on it, Dua says. When she was told to come to our headquarters, she tried not to avoid punishment. So they increased her sentence. It was supposed to be 20 lashes, but I whipped her 40 times. For more serious crimes, like adultery, the punishment was death by stoning. These women were not mere followers. They were committed disciples enforcing obedience. Another Hansa member named Osma received military training and liked it. But she says the public executions went too far for her sensibilities. The way the bodies were displayed in the streets after the executions was disgusting, she says. They'd leave a body hanging for a week so everyone who passed would see it and smell it. The Hansa Women's Brigade also helped manage one of the Islamic State's most disturbing practices, sexual slavery. When ISIS rolled across northern Iraq, it captured towns long inhabited by an ethnic group called Yazidis. They're non-Muslims with a secretive religion, and ISIS claimed they worship the devil. Yazidi men were killed on the spot. Yazidi girls of any age were taken as ghanima, spoils of war, to be distributed among the fighters. Farida was one of the spoils. All of the girls were screaming and crying because they didn't want to go with them, she says, but they beat the girls and dragged them away by force. ISIS established a slave market where fighters could buy and sell their captives. These men bragged about what a great time they would soon be having. I showed the video to the Yazidi girl, Farida. She instantly recognized the men. I saw that one, and this guy, she says. I don't know their names, but I saw them. She saw them laughing as they inspected more than 80 Yazidi girls, picking out the ones they desired. They sold me from one man to the next, she says. Farida was raped repeatedly for 3 months. She says she was considered too old by some of the ISIS men. They raped girls as young as 8, she says. They would say the older ones know something about men, while the younger ones know nothing. Huwaida was one of those innocents that the ISIS fighters sought out. She's just 12. She didn't know what rape meant, only that she woke up bleeding. He was old, she says about the man who bought her. He was 50. Farida and Huwaida both escaped, but the 12-year-old is so badly traumatized, she struggles to speak. ISIS women also allowed their own children to be turned into murderers and used as propaganda in deeply disturbing scenes like these. Children, the so-called ISIS cubs, were isolated, indoctrinated, and given military training. They went from playing soldiers to being soldiers, and then to stone-cold killers. Mohammed was one of those selected by ISIS to be a young cub, but he didn't like it. He kept skipping the training. So ISIS made an example of him. They chopped off the 14-year-old's opposite hand and foot. They put my arm on a table and they brought in the butcher, and he cut it, Mohammed says. This is the man who mutilated him, an Iraqi nicknamed the Bulldozer. The most difficult time is when I go to sleep, Mohammed says. Then the pain really starts. Mohammed cries whenever his bandages are changed. He can't afford to have the treatments done at a hospital. ISIS targeted children, he says. They'd give a boy some money or a bicycle and then take him in a car with a bomb to blow himself up. And ISIS women were equally responsible for the crimes. Hoda Muthanna had a son with an ISIS man. She wants to take the boy to the United States. She says joining ISIS was just a big mistake.
And you say now you regret coming. But I'm trying to understand what it is you regret exactly. Is it that you regret that you're in this situation?
No,
that you regret you're here?
I regret the whole thing. I regret the ideology. I regret ever coming here. I regret ever even going online. I regret everything, yeah.
I left wondering how much Hoda is changing her story because she wants to get out of this prison camp. From what I've seen, women were the backbone of ISIS, the ones who held the group together and made some of its worst atrocities possible. But why join in the first place? I watched the black flag of ISIS spread across the Muslim world like a plague. According to the Islamic State's own propaganda, this was God's will, foretold by the Prophet Muhammad himself. ISIS said it was fulfilling a divine mission, and naive believers flocked to be part of it.
But there is no other path to victory except through sacrifice and jihad.
They were convinced ISIS would herald a new Islamic golden age and create a pure state for Muslims, the Caliphate.
Oh, my brothers, jihad is the way.
I understood the desire to return to Islam's glorious past. ISIS promised to restore Muslim pride and prestige.
It means power after powerlessness. It means honor and dignity after embarrassment and failure.
As a young Muslim growing up in the West, Mubin Sheikh felt alienated and disillusioned. He himself was radicalized and joined a jihadist group before switching sides. He now works with Western intelligence agencies.
It offered to a lot of Muslims who looked around the world and saw Muslims in a state of disarray, weakness, loss, and failure. And they thought in their heads that if only we would establish the caliphate, everything else would fall into play and we'd all live happily ever after.
Tens of thousands of foreign fighters believed the Islamic State was their destiny. They destroyed their passports to show their commitment to the caliphate. For them, there was no going back. ISIS seemed like the natural thing to do.
The Christians, they go to the Pope in Italy, and the Jews, they go to Israel. Any Muslim will want to live in an Islamic State.
I'd heard arguments like this before, that ISIS members were victims of persecution or looking for something bigger, a cause. But Mubin Sheikh puts it more bluntly.
They need cannon fodder. They're there to fight and die for the so-called Islamic State. So, as dumb as they come, the more the merrier.
The most powerful weapon in the ISIS arsenal turned out to be propaganda. A media blitz that drew in thousands of new recruits.
It is the rise of the Khilafah.
Slick music videos depicted an epic struggle of good versus evil, and ISIS were the good guys. Recruits were told they were noble warriors on a divine mission to bring pride back to Islam. Their own graphic videos show the truth was much darker.
ISIS wanted thugs and criminals. And thugs and criminals is what they got.
ISIS reveled in the violence, documenting each gruesome act to excite the followers and intimidate their enemies. The world was outraged when a Jordanian pilot shot down and captured while flying over Syria was burned alive in a cage.
The goal was to shock and horrify.
What was it like when you got there?
Dystopia.
Dystopia.
Yeah, just all sorts of crazy. You can see madness in their eyes.
Hey, America.
This started to execute people for things which even in Islamic law you would not be executed for. I remember the, images of young teenager being executed because he ate during Ramadan. These are not capital offenses in Islamic law, but to them everything became a capital offense because they were a death cult.
I did see severed heads placed on spiked poles.
You saw heads on a stake?
Yeah.
And what did you think?
Just blocked it out. I tried to ignore it.
Others didn't care.
When you went in the spring of 2015,
Yeah.
it was already pretty clear what ISIS was all about. They had already beheaded people, they had already kidnapped Yazidi women, they had already committed atrocities that they were putting out in video after video. Did you know that?
I'm from the United States, from Texas. They like to execute people too. So I really don't see any difference. I mean, okay, maybe they might do it off camera, but it's the same.
But the videos which you say you saw were so gruesome.
Yeah.
That's not executions in Texas.
I know, but while I was there too, I saw the Americans killing plenty of innocent people, the Russians killing plenty of innocent people.
But whatever its justification, the Islamic State's murderous regime did nothing to restore Muslim pride. And its appetite for gruesome publicity seemed limitless. One ISIS member who became a household name was a British citizen, dubbed Jihadi John.
You claim to have withdrawn from Iraq 4 years ago.
Jihadi John, whose real name was Mohammed Emwazi, was a petty criminal back home who became an ISIS executioner. He was responsible for holding, torturing, and beheading 27 foreign hostages, including 4 Americans. He taunted President Obama.
Any attempt by you, Obama, to deny the Muslims their rights of living in safety under the Islamic Caliphate will result in the bloodshed of your people.
To understand the rise and fall of the Islamic State, you have to go back to the war in Iraq. Ashamed after defeat at the hands of the Americans and angered by the American-backed Shia government, ISIS was formed by Sunni extremists who believed Al-Qaeda was too soft. Their tactics were as old as history, but they remained brutally effective.
The way the Mongols conquered the world was get to a town and essentially say, you have two options. You'll all be killed or you'll be boiled alive. Your women will be raped. There was such terror of them that nobody would fight them.
The group's reputation for savagery was often enough to strike fear into their enemies. It got so bad, 30,000 Iraqi soldiers in the city of Mosul dropped their weapons and fled, rather than stand up to less than 1,000 ISIS fighters.
We spent $25 billion building this army inside of Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of personnel in the Iraqi security forces. And they didn't even fight. The Iraqi security forces just melted away.
Cities fell one by one. Raqqa on the banks of the Euphrates River, Mosul and its oil fields in Iraq, Deir ez-Zor, Sinjar, Ramadi, and Fallujah, even Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit, they all fell to ISIS, and the United States and its allies seemed powerless to stop them. But then, in the summer of 2014, something extraordinary happened when ISIS reached one little town called Kobani in northern Syria. Kobani was right on the border separating Turkey and Syria. The world's media and hundreds of Syrian refugees watched helplessly from the Turkish side as black-clad ISIS fighters advanced on the town. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Right in front of me, ISIS fighters were moving unopposed and completely out in the open.
These people are extremely frustrated by what's happening here. They see ISIS fighters in their villages, and they say if the Americans really want to bomb ISIS, they're not hard to find.
At the time, the U.S. government said Kobani just wasn't worth saving.
What's happening in Kobani, as horrific as it is, you have to step back and understand the strategic objective.
But the people of Kobani had their own objectives. They stood their ground and fought. I wanted to get inside to see if the resistance had a chance. I left the safety of Turkey and sprinted across no man's land directly into Kobani. Firefights were underway. ISIS had already captured more than half the town. The people of Kobani were trying to hang on to what they had left. These brave resistance fighters were ethnic Kurds, a minority group of millions in the Middle East that has been striving for After 5 brutal years, the caliphate has been defeated. The world is rid of the Islamic State. Or is it? The man who started it all, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has sworn to fight on, to take the fight to the West. And it's not an idle threat. Paris, London, Berlin, Brussels, Nice, Manchester, Orlando, San Bernardino, cities around the world have been targeted. Hundreds of people have been killed. As devastating as the terror attacks are, ISIS may have left an even more dangerous legacy. Tens of thousands of foreign fighters and their families are detained in makeshift prisoner of war camps scattered across Iraq and Syria. With nowhere to go, and an ideological hatred of the West still burning in their hearts. Al-Baghdadi has urged his supporters to attack the prisons and liberate their brothers.
What happens to all these other people in the camp? Do you think they're still dangerous?
It's obvious who are still radical, who are still dangerous, and who are completely flipped 180.
Hoda Muthanna is right to be worried. The women of ISIS continue to openly pledge allegiance to the group. Several women at this camp got together and beat a woman to death for betraying the cause. Guards have been stabbed.
How can people be convinced, our viewers be convinced, that you're not dangerous? I mean, how?
Because I want to come back to America and I want to just live safely under America, and I just want to raise my child and have nothing to do with jihad ever again.
The U.S. government is in no mood to forgive her.
Have you seen this? This was the Secretary of State, Pompeo, saying that you're not a U.S. citizen. Listen.
She is a terrorist. She's not a U.S. citizen. She ought not return to this country.
The U.S. says you can't go back.
I'm hoping...
Do you have any idea what's going to happen?
I'm hoping they do fix it up and bring me back, because there's nowhere else I'd rather be than America.
She may be telling the truth, but Mubin Sheikh, the former jihadist, says the so-called ISIS brides were not innocent victims.
Some were members of the women police, some were used as spies and messenger couriers. You have some that married ISIS fighters, but it was to breed, literally, the next generation of jihadi fighters. They understood their role in that.
And many of those children, those ISIS cubs who were raised on hate, still believe too. In the camp, the kids even made an ISIS flag, hoisted it, and chanted that they would carry on the struggle.
Unfortunately, these children will grow up living in prison camps, being hated and despised. So what we should probably prepare ourselves for is the next wave of ISIS cubs who have tried to become normal, but will realize that that is something that will forever be beyond their grasp.
UN investigators say the only way to defeat the ISIS ideology is to have Nuremberg-style trials, because many detainees themselves still believe they've done nothing wrong.
What do you think is going to happen to you now? What do you want to happen to you?
I don't know. They'll deport me. I don't know if my country will take me back, or they will put me in jail here.
Resigned to your future, whatever that future is.
Yeah, whatever that future is.
Do you regret joining the group? It doesn't really sound like you do. You sound like it was what it was and it happened.
There's regret, you know, but I'm not regretting that I came to Syria.
Despite facing years in prison, Warren Christopher Clark still has no regrets.
Maybe I go to jail, maybe I don't. I mean, I don't know. It's not really, you know, big thing to me, you know. Lots of great people have been to jail. Malcolm X has been to jail. Martin Luther King has been to jail. Nelson Mandela has been to jail.
Would you put yourself in that same category?
I don't know if I would be considered as great as these people, but you know, my dad always told me, he said, we're all going to die. So if you're going to die, die for something that you believe in.
But some have changed their minds.
Do you regret that you had gone there?
More than anything. It's obviously the worst decision I've ever made in my life.
So are you apologizing?
Absolutely.
Some might say, of course he's apologizing now. He's in U.S. custody. He'll say anything.
I think I have a real message, and the message is that the Islamic State is not bringing Islam to the world. And people need to know that. And I'll say that from, you know, till the day I die.
Mohimanul Buhiya served a 2-year sentence for aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. He cooperated with intelligence agencies and is now free back in the U.S. Warren Christopher Clark is back in the U.S. too, facing charges of providing material support to ISIS. If convicted, he faces up to 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Zayed Abdelhamid remains in Kurdish custody. Trinidad has no plans to repatriate him anytime soon. And Hoda Muthanna and her son have been moved to another detention camp in northern Syria for their own safety as they await their fate. The Islamic State may have been defeated, but the threat will live on for years to come.
The caliphate is destroyed, but is ISIS dead?
No. They're still there. There's still people who fought with them. There's still people who have unique expertise. There's still an ideology that attaches to it. I think ISIS is going to be around for a long time.